Chapter 7 The Fireflies. Time was running out. In just over 20 minutes, the king's guards would come looking for us to take us to the palace, and we didn't want to endanger the shepherd's hiding place. So we thanked his hospitality, and we took off from place as fast as we could. My mother motioned for us to stop by a river. Her gaze had remained fixed, and for a few minutes she remained motionless like a statue. Little Levitt tugged at her dress. "What's wrong, Mom? What are you looking at?" My mother stroked the little boy's hair without taking her eyes off the river, and with a slight smile she broke the silence. "Do you remember the year we had locust plagues in our crops? It was something terrible. I remember that I thought there was no greater evil for a farmer than a plague of insects." "Continue, Mom," Sam said impatiently. "Upon entering the city, it caught my attention that there were no bees fluttering the honeycombs, and that with so many flowers around, there wasn't a single insect in all the surroundings. Furthermore, the guardians of the town are armed with nets and not with spears. They seemed not to get nervous by our presence upon arrival in the kingdom, though somewhat anxious to keep an eye on us. By all of this, I've come to a conclusion. The real enemies of this kingdom are the insects and not the people whom the king kindly welcomes to be part of under his rule of all the big delusions that this kingdom hides. But here comes the most important part. Look there, by the river." "They are fireflies!" Levitt shouted. "Exactly," my mother replied. "And what greater enemy for a fruit of darkness than an insect of light?" We all looked at each other smiling. "Quick, we must hunt them," said Sam. "Wait a minute." My father held my restless brother by the shirt and continued speaking. "Remember that in nature there are rules that we must comply with if we don't want them to turn against us. We'll catch the insects without causing any harm to them or to the vegetation that surrounds them. To do so, we'll use the crocheted cardigan that Alexandra is wearing. It'll be our improvised net, and we'll keep the insects in the food basket. We'll take enough so they help us win the battle, but we'll leave the rest so as not to modify this habitat. Now let's get to work." I quickly took off my cardigan and picked up some fireflies as respectfully as I could. Our plan had to work, mainly because we didn't have any other up our sleeves. We would be releasing some of these bugs in each of the lands that we were to find with this planted fruit. I was nervous. Remember how I felt the sweat slipping through the palms? We started with the lands farthest from the palace, those in which we had verified that there were less quantity of media, and how pleasant was our surprise to see what happened when these light bugs fed on these fruits. They disintegrated almost instantly and seemed have a rapid impact on the heavy mist of the environment. And thus, for each disintegrated food, the greater the natural light that was regaining the environment, and directly proportional to this, The more light there was, the more Mithya fruits began to disintegrate on the ground. We ran, releasing more and more fireflies all over the land. We had almost reached the palace. We would release all the remaining ones there, and soon it would all be over. But what had happened? Where were the fireflies at? I realized that when I released them in the last lands, the basket had remained open, and little by little they had escaped along the way. Not a single one of them remained, and, worst of all, is that we were in front of the palace, and our time had run out. Slowly the doors were opened, and the two guards who had been sent to greet us escorted us to the presence of King Maya, who was very disappointed when he realized that our clothes hadn't been replaced as my mother had promised, and that, instead, we looked dirtier and more unkempt than we did upon our arrival. My mother was quick to give the King of Lies just the answer he wanted to hear. Your Majesty, I apologize on behalf of our entire family for our deplorable appearance. But it is so easy to get lost in the wonderful architectural works of your city that we have almost forgotten the time we had, and we have exhausted it all going one after another these great and wonderful works of yours. Maya immediately changed his expression. He was convinced and congratulated with my mother's excellent excuse. We all looked at each other, trying to buy time. There was no plan B, so for the time being, time would only play in our favor. My mother kept distracting the king with numerous compliments and flatteries about this and that of the palace, trying to delay the moment for lunch in which he would undoubtedly invite us to eat the dark fruit. But soon there would be no more columns, portraits, and vases to flatter in order to stay safe. The inescapable moment had come. The king motioned for the servants to fill the royal linen room with trays and trays of the fruit of Mithya. We found ourselves sitting on chairs carved with solid gold, and under a dark glass dome that blocked the entry of light, with some creepy portraits of the king drawn all over the place. It'd gone too far. The charade couldn't carry on. There's no way I'm going to eat that, Mom. We've got to do something, I shouted with great energy. I'd lost my nerves, and I was standing there not knowing what to do. My parents looked at each other the same way they did the first time we entered the kingdom. Then I realized that I had screwed up. They did have a plan. Suddenly, my father threw one of the silver trays towards the glass dome on the ceiling, and it immediately smashed into countless pieces. The light from a warm and radiant sun then began to get into the room. My parents had calculated that it was only a matter of time before the explosion of light that would cause in the rest of the kingdom reached the palace, as if it were a fire that spread out more and more in the forest. The king and his entourage tried to save the fruits that were on the table, whilst they were disintegrating with dizzying speed. We were safe. The light of the true sun had destroyed all the fruits, and they could never again poison. But what would happen to all these citizens, that the pastor told us would not be able to bear the true sunlight again. Curious battle this is, in which a simple and small insect of light had destroyed a gigantic kingdom of darkness. But why had neither the Mayan king nor the palace authorities died? Maya just seemed to have gone blind, just like some of his subjects and guards. Others, however, didn't. Why was that so? We were able to observe that after the rupture of the dome, those who ran to get their treasures rather than trying to save their lives were gone blind by the ray of sun. On the other hand, those who were able to remain immobile with their eyes closed, appealing for mercy in the depths of their hearts, managed to remember who they truly were, and thus immediately recovered the essential DNA that the fruit of Mithya had stolen from them. That game of opposites seemed to have ended. Light had conquered darkness, the simplicity of an insect to the complexity of a maze, and lastly, the honesty of the pure heart to the deceit of the greedy. After several minutes, the palace gates were brought down by hundreds of citizens who had recovered their memories and were running to the palace in search of justice and peace. The Mayan king, now blind and immersed in his own darkness, could never rule again and went off on himself until the end of his days. The Rajasi kingdom was abandoned by the people who had inhabited it, who now, after being masters of their own memories, went again in search of their origins. And it was thus that together with these people we left these lands as quickly as we could, but not without first realizing with great joy that the old shepherd had finally been able to embrace his only desire.